Alrighty, welcome to all my new people joining in today. This is Jovan, Coach Jovan, whatever you want to call me, and welcome to Weightroom Overtime. This is going to be an interesting topic as, many people, have a misconception of plyometrics, of, what really goes into the planning of it, and also, things like what part of the year should I incorporate plyometric training. So if you are interested in learning more into, why plyometrics are important to sport, relevant to sport, when you should apply them, and then also, what simple exercises can you, do for plyometrics, right? And, how to choose those correct ones. So if you're interested in that, this is going to be your show, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. So if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for me, and leave a comment. Let me know what you think. About plyometrics, when you should apply them, and then also, should everybody do them? Let me know what your thoughts are. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to it. Alrighty, so plyometrics, right? What is plyometrics? So plyometrics is very popular, especially now when things have evolved, science has evolved, exercise is always evolving. That's why it's a science. But a lot of people, or a lot of trainers also misguide or have, also related to this short straightening cycle, right? Stretch shortening cycle, sorry. And a lot of people use this term or throw this term around, and some people don't know what that means or understand what that means. And if you're not into exercise science or a trainer or anything like that, then a lot of the times you won't understand what the stretch shortening cycle is. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it is, what it entails. So it really starts to replace this term of plyometrics, right? So it describes this resistance training more accurately to some movements, right? So there's a cycle of your muscles really when they interact with the force of the ground, and you're basically it's the power movement, right? So the cycle is a sequence of eccentric, isometric, and concentric actions, right? And it's really characterized by an eccentric motion leading into ballistic concentric motion. So one prime example that I like to give this is when you're doing a bench press, right? So consider, let's say you're doing a barbell bench press, right? And there's a method, well, that's not a method, this just is an idea to kind of explain or picture it in your head. So if you were to start a bench press with the bar already on your chest, and then you're pressing up, that is an isometric and then a concentric action only, right? So think about it, you're starting already in an isometric position with the bar down, your shoulders are back, retracted, and all you're doing is pressing, and that is going to be the concentric action, right? Usually when you're doing a bench press. If you want to compare that to the stretch shortening cycle, it is where you start the bar at the hold, the little hold things where you put the weight in. Sorry, I heard my mic, I'm too far from my mic. But and then you would lower the weight, and then basically that's isometric, and then back to the concentric motion, right? That's really what that means, for those who might not fully understand what that term means. So the other way to kind of think about this too, when you're doing a long jump, right? There's a death jump, or a long jump, either or. When you are running up, you're ready to explode in power, as far as you can. That's also an example of the stretch shortening cycle, right? Because you're gonna plant off the ground, and then there's this time in in the air where it's not really doing anything, and then you land, and then it concentrates again. So it's a term, and I'm not gonna go too in depth into the actual science, because there's no point if you don't really understand some of these terms. So I don't want to confuse a lot of people, or athletes and stuff like that listen to this podcast. But we'll talk about the importance of it when you should apply it. So when you're talking about plyometrics, right, who needs to do them, when you should do them, I think it's more of a question of what the sport or activity you're going to be participating in. So for example, I did a study in grad school, as I'm still in grad school wrapping up, on basketball players, on teenagers. And what we find is when we had, a control group, and a group that had plyometrics for their training and a group that didn't. And overall, what we saw was an increase in their jump after completing I think it was a 12-week plyometric program. So the vertical jump went up, which is huge for basketball players, right? Because you want to be able to jump high, compared to the girls that didn't do plyometrics in the training program, right? So that's just an example that I saw. But you also have to take in consideration the plyometric exercises that you're also applying for example, I did basketball at the time, right? So some of the things that I did for basketball players was a lot of, box jumps. There was a lot of bounding. There was a lot of single leg hops, jump over barrier. And it also depends, right? Because let's say you have a freshman, right? And a basketball team in high school can vary from freshmen to seniors. Well, the freshman isn't going to be as very strong or versatile, or even, how would you say this? Their development isn't the same as a senior who's been playing 3 years already, right? Or 4 maybe. And they've already been through a couple years of, a training program. So you can see how this can vary and how you just separate your athletes when you have a team that's going through plyometrics, for example. You can't necessarily expect the freshman to be doing exactly the same exercises as a senior. And that goes for everything in the weight room, by the way. It's not just plyometrics. I think you have to understand that there is, different things, and has to be individualized for a specific athlete in their training age, right? So every athlete is different. You got to treat them different, and understanding that, when you're doing a programming for whether that's strength training, whether that's plyometrics, whether that's, strength, power, it has to be dedicated for each specific athlete, not as a group. And I know a lot of coaches, in my experience, and even me in my earlier time as a coach, was, hey, I'm just going to put this whole team all through the same workout, because whether that's limited to time, whether that's inexperience, whether that's, education. But I think understanding, that, hey, even if you do have a team, you can still separate it based off, the levels of experience, levels of strength, levels of, how quick they are. You can separate these into smaller groups and then assign different, exercises for those groups, right? So that's a good way to do it. So for plyometrics, I think, back to the question of who should do it, right? I think even for young athletes of 7, 8 years old, and I'm talking about youth athletes, there hasn't really been any, studies showing that this is negative necessarily for their performance. Although there is some plyometric exercises that I think you should be kind of worried about, or, maybe not do, just because, again, they're still growing, right? We don't want to, damage their growth plates or anything like that to allow their limbs to grow to the extent that they need to. So the reason I bring this up is because there is some plyometric exercises as like depth jumps, where you're on a box jump really, and then you're landing from, there could be, high distances depending on the level of the athlete. But that's something you may want to kind of let them do that in their, teenage years, or something, in later in time where they're a little bit more stronger, their base has already been established and stuff like that. So just something to think about when you're applying these for, younger athletes. In my experience, you're working with a lot of youth. Actually, I started with a lot of youth athletes. I actually did a lot more of like bounding type of work. If you don't know what bounding is, it's kind of like skipping in a sense, but in a, one-sided movement. So like going on the right foot and then going on my left, planning and then changing direction to the right, that kind of stuff. Because again, it's helping them establish their footwork when it comes to placement, and then how to work off of the other foot. I think that's really important for younger athletes. And then also landing mechanics. So I know the depth jumps is probably going to be not something we encourage for younger athletes, but I think something like single leg hops, one leg hops, stuff like that is very crucial for younger athletes, because they're building the base of stability in their their legs. And plyometrics is still a form of strength training, just in a different time of the year or different phase of a training program. So understanding that is huge. So for any parent out there or coaches that have young athletes or have athletes in general, the plyometrics are a huge part of a training program and should be incorporated in any, annual training program that you may have. And it can also depend on the sport, but ideally if you're playing a team sport or even individual sports, like if you're playing if you're boxing, if you're doing MMA, wrestling, plyometrics are still involved, because again, it's another relationship or another way to manifest power, right? So we're taking your annual training program, for example, right? You've already been through a GPP phase, which is general preparatory phase, to hypertrophy phase, and then you went over to max strength, and then you went to power, and then you're doing plyometrics, right? So when you get to the plyometrics part, it should really manifest your whole annual training program that you just did. Even it should show all your strength and how you progressed over the year, to be able to manifest that in some plyometric movements, because then it's going to eventually translate into the field, hopefully, or into the match, whatever you decide to participate in. But really, I think it's crucial for every athlete to do plyometrics, right? And I think a lot of the misconception, and I see this all the time at the gyms, and coaches, team coaches, not necessarily trainers or strength and conditioning coaches, because they understand, but I'm talking just in general, the general population. Even me growing up and playing sports, even me training as a very young coach, I wouldn't really know the science behind certain things. And I know for soccer, for example, because that's what I played, there was a lot of one leg hops over the ball, and stuff like that. Yes, it's still part of soccer. However, that should have been established a little later on, closer to competition, rather than at the beginning. And I know a lot of the times there's a lot of coaches and trainers that have them do plyometric exercises as soon as the first couple weeks after they've been established on a basic plan. They go to like, hey, let's just start doing some wall balls, or let's start doing something like jump over barriers and stuff like that, when necessarily that shouldn't be ideally the best time. I think the best time is after the strength training program has been done and you're getting close to competition and getting close to your deload, or you're just going to start to taper and peak. That's the time you want to allow your body to recover and then get ready for competition. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, or maybe a little confused, is the plyometric phase or plyometric time where you should incorporate some of these movements or plyometric exercises shouldn't be on the first week of conditioning or second week of conditioning. This should be done last, when you're getting ready to compete. That's when plyometrics should be done, because you're manifesting everything that you have done throughout the year to then showcase as you're going to peak for a tournament or whatever it may be, right? That's why it's so important and crucial for athletes to understand is, hey, I know you want to get ahead of yourself, or coaches want to be able to, hey, I need to get this guy better on his footwork. And although that might translate, initially could help with their balance or whatever it may be, there's other exercises you can incorporate for whether that's balance or stability that you can do, and then that's going to prepare him better for his strength phase, whether that's squats, whether that's single leg RDLs or single leg squats or whatever it may be, right? That's why it's so important to understand that, because if you go straight to plyometrics, you're not going to get the best of them, but you're only going to showcase what he has been doing in the off season. And a lot of times some of these athletes don't do anything in the off season, so understanding that is important, I think, for athletes. Okay, so that's one of the main reasons I wanted to get a whole episode on this, is to better understand what you guys have been taught. I really hope that you guys can comment if you're watching the video, or wherever you do it, and reach out to me. I'm interested in learning a lot more of whether you're a coach, whether you're an athlete, what your experience has been with plyometrics. Do you do plyometrics regularly, or is there only a part of the year that you usually do this, like I kind of incorporate for my athletes? And then I just wanted to give you guys a couple different exercises that I like to incorporate, and this could be for, let's say, soccer players. If you're watching this as a soccer player, you need to incorporate. And so, this brings me to my last thing before I conclude. But when you're thinking about applying plyometric program, right, you want to take a look at movements that are going to translate into the sport that you're playing. And that's a huge factor, because you could be, let's say, playing golf, right? Why would you have a golf player doing box jumps when he doesn't necessarily need to jump, right? Yes, it could produce power, but there's other movements that you can incorporate to, better his swing or whatever it may be, right? His landing foot. There's, jump over barriers, there's single leg hops, there's, single leg, step ups, there's a whole different other things that you can do that are gonna, again, translate to the movements that are performed in the sport itself. So having said that, you have to be kind of specific into what exercises you choose. And again, just like anything else, you can always increase the intensity, the rest time, the load, anything like that as you progress. Just be aware of, overreaching, or if there's, overtraining sometimes too. If you can't go too hard on plyometrics, you got to understand, hey, there's a reason to do this, and there's a way to progress, whether that's, through the exercise or the program. But for the exercises that you want to choose, I think it's important to, again, look at the movements that are going to translate into the sport. And then when you're choosing them, there has to be a correct order and a warm-up before you do plyometrics. So don't go straight to, well, this is going to be part of my warm-up and then I'm going to go lift. No, you should warm up with appropriate warm-up that's going to have, some of the same movements for the plyometrics. So like high knees, open gates, closed gates, stuff like that. And then you go and choose your exercises. So that's kind of, you guys, it's kind of quick. I was also testing a new software called Riverside FM. Shout out to them. This is awesome. But I really want to hear your feedback on this. Coaches, players, parents, just know that your athletes should be on a training program, whether that's in the off season, right now, 3 months from now. They should always be training if they're looking to compete at a higher level, whether that's college, whether that's pros, whether that's high school, varsity team trying to make a college, scholarship. I've been there, I've done that. Reach out to me. I love to help people out. If you're interested in just, a basic training program, whether that's an annual program, whether that's, trying to lose weight, trying to gain strength, trying to play, sports at a high level, reach out to me. I have programs available. I can coach you. I can basically make your athletes ready for success, man. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was pretty quick. It wasn't too thorough into some of the science because, I don't want to bore you guys to death, and, hopefully you guys can come back. So give this video a thumbs up, comment, again, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks, guys.